Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and to our Allison Auditorium. My name's Ed Fulner. I'm the president of the Heritage Foundation. On behalf of all my colleagues on the Board of Trustees and the staff of the Foundation, it's my very great pleasure to welcome you here this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, to paraphrase the Vice President of the United States, Tuesday was a big blank deal. It was a seismic rejection of the left's agenda. And to quote the President of the United States, elections have consequences. The election is over. The battle shifts to public policy questions. We move from the arena of electoral politics to the arena of policy politics. And that's what we're involved in here at the Heritage Foundation. At Heritage, with our more than 700,000 members around the country, we work every day to build an America where freedom, opportunity, prosperity, and civil society flourish. And through every policy battle, we fight alongside our allies on Capitol Hill for the success of our ideas. Just yesterday, we released our top priorities in the form of a checklist for Washington, to cut spending, to repeal Obamacare, to stop tax increases, to protect America, and to stop stifling regulation. Over the last 2 years, Senator Mitch McConnell and other beleaguered conservatives in the Congress have boldly, and in many cases successfully, held the line against many initiatives that would have moved the country in what we believe is the wrong direction. Senator McConnell has led the good guys in battles over health care, campaign finance, real tax reform, sensible foreign and defense policy, and so many other policy issues. For all that, Senator, we are grateful. We're excited to work with you and your reinforcements as they arrive in the Capitol over the next few weeks, and we look forward to the policy battles and the policy discussions in the months ahead. Mitch McConnell was first elected to the United States Senate in 1984. He's been the Republican leader of the United States Senate since 2007. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my very great pleasure to welcome back to the Heritage Foundation, Senator Mitch McConnell. Take it away, Mitch.
Well, thank you very much, Ed, and let me start by telling you again how grateful conservatives all across America are that you helped found this organization and have led it so exceptionally successfully for these many years. Thank you so much, Ed. Appreciate it. And obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't also congratulate you on your good judgment in having among your distinguished fellows the most conservative Secretary of Labor in American history and the only cabinet member of the Bush administration who served from beginning to end, and I'm speaking, of course, of my roommate, Elaine Chao. Over the past 2 years, the American people looked at what was going on in Washington, and they became increasingly worried. Not only were Democratic leaders ignoring our nation's ongoing job crisis, their big government policies and out-of-control spending was causing some to wonder about the future of the American dream itself. Americans worried about the consequences of a $14 trillion debt, about a health care bill that creates 159 new bureaucratic entities, including 2 massive new entitlement programs. They worried about all the bailouts. They worried about every other piece of legislation that seemed like it was designed to kill jobs rather than create them. Most of all, they worried that about what some have called the Europeanization of America. They worried that it would continue unchecked, and that as a result, our children and grandchildren could no longer expect to have the same opportunities that all of us have had. 2 days ago, those worries gave way to a new optimism. For the past 2 years, Democratic lawmakers chose to ignore the American people. So on Tuesday, the American people chose new lawmakers. For the past, they held their elected representatives to account. And that's what, of course, the founding fathers had in mind with the midterm election. And they demonstrated to all of us that constitutional conservatism is actually alive and well. There isn't a reason for Republicans to gloat. Rather, it's a time for both parties to realize who's really in charge, the people, and to be grateful for the opportunity we now have to begin to turn this ship around. Tuesday was indeed a referendum, not a choice. It was a report card on the administration and anyone who supported its agenda, plain and simple. It doesn't take a room full of political scientists to figure that out. Americans voted for change in the last 2 elections because of 2 long and difficult wars and because they hoped a changing of the guard would stabilize the economy and get America moving again. And then the people they elected set about dismantling the free market, handing out political favors at taxpayers' expense, expanding government, and creating a more precarious future for our children. In other words, Democratic leaders used the crisis of the moment to advance an agenda Americans didn't ask for and couldn't afford. And then they ignored and dismissed anyone who dared speak out against it. So the voters didn't suddenly fall in love with Republicans, we know that. They fell out of love with Democrats. And while they may have voted to send more Republicans to Washington, they're sending them here with clear marching orders. Very clear marching orders. Stop the big government freight train and respect the will of the people who sent you there. As Churchill once observed, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. And I can't think of a better way to sum up Tuesday's election than that. This morning, I would like to talk a little bit more about how we got here and the task ahead. And I wanted to do it here at the Heritage Foundation because for nearly 40 years, Heritage has played a crucial role in promoting and defending the principle of free enterprise, limited government, freedom, and a strong defense. In other words, the very principles the American people voted to uphold in Tuesday's historic election. First, how we got here. Let's cast our minds back for a moment to early 2009. I think a Newsweek cover from early February of that year sums up the conventional wisdom in Washington at that time, at least among a lot of Democrats. This was the headline. It read, "We're all socialist now." And I'll just note parenthetically that Newsweek was recently sold for less than the cover price of a single copy of the magazine. Hopefully the Democrats won't bail them out too. Anyway, while the media was still groping to define the 2008 election, Republicans were taking stock. We knew the principles that had made our party great were the same principles that had made America great, and that if we were going to solve the problems of the day, we would have to embrace and explain those principles, not discard or conceal them. So we renewed our commitment to core principles, win, lose, or draw. If we had not done this, the administration would never suffer the consequences for pushing policies Americans opposed. And Americans wouldn't have had a clear alternative. And that's why this, in my view, was the single most important thing Republicans in Congress did to prepare the ground for Tuesday's election. By sticking together in principled opposition to policies we viewed as harmful, we made it perfectly clear to the American people where we stood, and we gave voters a real choice on Election Day. At the same time, we made it perfectly clear from the beginning that if President Obama proposed policies that were consistent with our principles, we would work with him. Just 2 days after the inauguration, in fact, I made a public offer at the National Press Club to accept the president's campaign promise of post-partisanship by proposing to work with him on a number of goals that he himself had suggested, such as reforming entitlements, reducing the debt, increasing our energy independence, and lowering taxes to create jobs. But it turned out the White House had different plans. Their strategy from the start, as I said, was to govern hard left and use their big majorities to push through the most left-wing agenda possible, squeezing unpopular proposals through Congress by the slimmest majorities, and hoping Americans would forget the details and the unseemly process over a period of time. The Democrats' idea of consensus was for Republicans to do whatever the administration wanted us to. And that's why they plowed ahead from the very beginning with one piece of legislation after another written by liberals for liberals. And so by the spring of 2009, they had given us ample opportunity to stand up for the principles of limited government, lower taxes, and a strong defense. First, they called for the closing of Guantanamo without any plan for housing the terrorists who were held there. They had forced through their $1 trillion stimulus, proposed a federal budget that would double the national debt in 5 years and triple it in 10, and bailed out automakers that should have been allowed to reorganize or to fail. And it shouldn't be lost on anybody, by the way, that the only one that refused to bail out, Ford, is the one that's doing the best today. As Democrats governed left, Republicans stood together time and time again, making the case for conservative alternatives. And over the course of 19 months, Democrats added $3 trillion to the debt. More than 2.5 million Americans would lose their jobs, and Republicans would win races in states that had gone solidly for Democrats in 2008, states like Virginia, New Jersey, and of all places, Massachusetts. Clearly, the Democratic agenda was not the change Americans had hoped for, and Republicans were offering a clear alternative. That was the message of those races, and that was the message on Tuesday. The question now is whether Americans were wise to entrust Republicans with the task of reversing the damage. In answer, I would argue that Republicans can be entrusted with the task voters have given us, not because we say so, but because we've already been at it for 2 years. We've shown that we share the priorities the people have voiced. We have fought to defend them. Now we're ready to get back to work on their behalf, which raises a practical question. What can Americans expect from Republicans now? Let's start with the big picture. Over the past week, some have said it was indelicate of me to suggest that our top political priority over the next 2 years should be to deny President Obama a second term. But the fact is, if our primary legislative goals are to repeal and replace the health spending bill, to end the bailouts, cut spending, and shrink the size and scope of government, the only way to do all of those things is to put someone in the White House who won't veto any of these things. We can hope the president will start listening to the electorate after Tuesday's election, but we can't plan on that. And it would be foolish to expect that Republicans will be able to completely reverse the damage Democrats have done as long as a Democrat holds the veto pen. There's just no getting around it. By their own admission, leaders of the Republican Revolution in 1994 think their greatest mistake was overlooking the power of the veto. They gave the impression they were somehow in charge when they weren't. And after President Clinton vetoed their bills, making it impossible for them to accomplish all of their goals, they ended up being viewed as failures, sellouts, or both. Today, Democrats not only have the White House, they have the Senate as well. So we have to be realistic about what we can and cannot achieve, while at the same time recognizing that realism should never be confused with capitulation. On health care, that means we can and should propose and vote on straight repeal repeatedly. But we can't expect the president to sign it. So we'll also have to work in the House on denying funds for implementation and in the Senate on votes against its most egregious provisions. At the same time, we'll need to continue educating the public about the ill effects of this bill on individuals, both young and old, families, and small businesses. And this is why oversight will play a crucial role in Republican efforts going forward. We may not be able to bring about a straight repeal in the next 2 years, and we may not win every vote against targeted provisions, even though we should have bipartisan support for some of those efforts. But we can compel the administration officials to attempt to defend this indefensible health spending bill and other costly government-driven measures like the stimulus and financial reform. We also need groups like Heritage to continue studying the ill effects of the health care bill and to show how its implementation is hurting families, seniors, and small businesses, limiting choices and making us less competitive. We welcome any help we can get in reversing the damage this bill has done and will do in the future. Through oversight, we'll also keep a spotlight on the various agencies the administration will now use to advance through regulation what it can't through legislation. Potential backdoor efforts in this area include imposing a new national energy tax through the EPA, now that cap and trade is dead, additional health care provisions through HHS, a card check through the National Labor Relations Board, and some form of immigration change through the use of administrative amnesty and the selective enforcement of our laws. Good oversight can also make more accountable all the policy czars the administration has installed without any accountability to Congress or the American people. Another obstacle is the temptation to overread our task. It's my view that Americans are no more interested in a Republican plan for using government to re-engineer society than they were in the Democrats' plan to do so. Government has limits, thank heavens, and voters want us to respect them. That's why Republicans will focus on doing a few things and doing them well. We will stop the liberal onslaught. We will make the case for repeal of the health spending bill even as we vote to eliminate its worst parts. We will vote to freeze and cut discretionary spending. We will fight to make sure that any spending bill that reaches the Senate floor is amendable so members can vote for the spending cuts Americans are asking for. We will push to bring up and vote for House-passed spending rescission bills. On the economy, we will work hard to ensure Democrats don't raise taxes on anybody, especially in the middle of a recession. We will loudly oppose future stimulus bills that only stimulate the deficit and fight any further job-killing regulations. We will fight tooth and nail on behalf of Americans struggling to find and to create jobs. And when it comes to educating the public about the effects of Democratic legislation, we will fulfill our constitutional duty to oversee the executive branch through smart, aggressive oversight. We will scrutinize Democrat legislation and force them to defend it. And we will continue to make the case that Democrats' big government vision hinders freedom, prosperity, and opportunity. And that while it may benefit some in the short term, it exposes everyone to calamity down the road. If we do these things well over the next 2 years, I believe the voters will be pleased with what they did on Tuesday. And Republicans will be in a much better position to reverse the worst excesses of the past 2 years and lay the groundwork for the kind of change we want and need. Meanwhile, Republican governors will help by showing at the state level that the kind of change we want is not only possible, but also effective in cutting waste, creating jobs, and showing that government can work for the people, not against them. Think tanks like Heritage will help too by arming us with ideas and tools like this week's checklist for getting America back to work. And Tea Party activists will continue to energize our party and challenge us to follow through on our commitments. Now, none of this is to say that Republicans have given up cooperating with the president. The American people reminded us this week that we work for them, and we owe it to them and future generations to work together to find solutions to present troubles and to help guide our nation to better days. But as I see it, the White House has a choice. They can change course, or they can double down on a vision of government that the American people have roundly rejected. If they choose the former, they'll find a partner in Republicans. If they don't, we'll have more disagreements ahead. The formula is simple. When the administration agrees with the American people, we will agree with the administration. When it disagrees with the American people, we won't. This has been our posture from the beginning of this administration, and we intend to stick with it. If the administration wants cooperation, it will have to begin to move in our direction. There is no reason we can't work together to prevent a tax hike on small businesses. There's no reason we can't work together on energy independence, cutting spending, or increasing American exports by completing free trade agreements. And we can continue to work together to give our armed forces in Afghanistan, Iraq, and around the world whatever they need to accomplish their mission. So this morning, I re-extend an offer that's been on the table for 2 years to cooperate on shared goals. Because ultimately, this isn't about an election. It's about doing what's best for our country. The American people want us to put aside the left-wing wish list and work together on helping to create jobs and restore the economy to health and prosperity. There is no reason the two parties can't work together on achieving these goals. But whether or not the administration has a mid-course correction, Republicans have a plan for following through on the wishes of the American people. It starts with gratitude and a certain humility for the task we've been handed. It means sticking ever more closely to the conservative principles that got us here. It means learning the lessons of history. And above all, it means listening to the people who sent us here. If we all do this, we'll finish the job. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Leader. That was wonderful. Okay, questions. Say questions. Please keep the questions short, pointed, and no speeches from the floor, please.
Please state your name and affiliation.
Yeah, Matt Cover with CNSnews.com. The Fed just recently announced it was going to buy $600 billion in federal debt and Treasury bonds. Will Republicans try and pass some legislation to prevent or at least restrict the Treasury from selling its debt to the Fed rather than on the open market?
I was having a hard time picking up your voice. You were asking about spending and debt?
Yeah. Is it?
There are two pieces of the puzzle, obviously. Number one is the annual discretionary spending.
Yeah. No. I just wanted to know if the Republicans are going to try and prevent or stop the Treasury from selling federal bonds to the Fed rather than putting them on the open market.
I haven't got an opinion on that at this point.
Senator?
Senator Brett Ferguson with BNA. I'm curious if you think tax reform is an issue that you could work together with the Democrats on.
What do you say?
Tax reform.
Oh.
Is that an issue we can work bipartisan?
Well, I think the first thing we've got to do is make sure taxes don't go up. You know, we have a tax rate that's been in place for almost a decade. Our friends on the other side, at least some of them, they were divided on this issue, thought it was a good idea to have a tax increase on some Americans in the middle of what most Americans think is a recession. So we'll have immediately before us, before the end of the year, a very serious question about whether we're going to prevent a tax increase on anybody or anything at the first of the year. That needs to be resolved first. Tax reform is a huge, complicated issue. I'm always interested in tackling that, but in the short term, we have to make sure that taxes don't go up on anybody. And by the way, there's bipartisan opposition to raising taxes on anybody. There were up to 40 House Democrats who wrote a letter to the Speaker saying basically we agree with the Republicans, we shouldn't be raising taxes on anybody. There were at least 5 Senate Democrats who said the same thing, and that's why they shelved that argument back in September and punted it to the lame duck. You've heard them say, you've heard the President say and others say, well, this is just a tax increase on the rich. When you get down into defining what that means, a tax increase on the top 2 rates would affect 750,000 small businesses in this country who pay taxes as individuals, not as corporations. It would affect 50% of small business income and 25% of the workforce. This is a serious tax increase in the middle of a recession. We think it's a bad idea. What I hope we'll do is come together during the lame duck and agree to extend the current tax policy for everyone.
Add down here.
Penny Starr, CNS News. What do you think, though, right now is the very top priority for people out there? What do you think the people that voted this wave of conservatives want done first?
Yeah, I think people are interested in spendings, debt, and private sector job creation. They've taken a look at the effect of borrowing money from foreigners that will have to be paid back by our children and grandchildren and what kind of an impact that had on job creation, and they don't see much evidence of it. So I think most Americans think we ought to be stimulating job growth in the private sector. So spending, debt, job creation in the private sector are the things that I think Americans are significantly upset about, and I think was at the root of the electoral success that my party had last Tuesday.
Senator McConnell, Carolyn Pursuti with Voice of America TV. You've been quoted as saying that the election gave you a mandate to be, in your wordage, something like the backside of a mule. Can you explain what you meant by that?
I'm not sure I remember saying that.
You didn't say that?
Sounds pretty good, but I'm not sure I remember saying that.
Well, can you explain the mandate that the voters gave you then, and if you can explain it in verbiage that I can use on TV? Thank you.
Look, you know, I think I mentioned earlier, let me say it again, Tuesday's election was not about Republicans, it was about the Democrats. They got a report card. They got an F. We're not going to misread the mandate. You didn't see Speaker to be John Boehner or myself spiking the ball in the end zone, acting like you know this was about us. It was candidly it was about them, and everybody knows that. So the mandate, if you will, for change is directed at the other guys. We are right where we have been, and the wonderful thing about that 2 days after the election is we know for sure the American people agree with the policy arguments that we had over the last 2 years. It was very clear that Republicans in the House and Senate didn't think this was the right course to take. And so that's the message I take out of it. And I think we'll find out in the next few days whether the President takes the same message out of it. I expect his consultants are telling him privately, this was about you, and he was pretty much, I think, agreeing to that yesterday in the press conference. And so we'll see how they want to change direction. And Look, I've said repeatedly, and I'll say it again today, I don't want the president to fail. I want him to change. And I think the American people want him to change. He's going to be in office 2 more years. We weren't sent here to do nothing. And if he wants to address spending, debt, and private sector job creation, he'll find a willing partner in Senate and House Republicans.
Senator McConnell, yesterday President Obama indicated that he'd work with Republicans on an earmark moratorium, and Senator DeMint plans to bring that to a vote in the Republican conference on November 16th. Will you support that?
Well, every president, Republican or Democrat, would love to have a blank check from Congress to do whatever he chose to do on every single issue, and we'll be discussing the appropriateness of giving the president that kind of blank check in the coming weeks, because that's really what that issue is about. As I think all of you know, you could eliminate every congressional earmark and you would save no money. It's really an argument about discretion. We decide how much we're going to spend either when we pass a budget, or in the case of this past year when we don't pass a budget, when we produce a top line for the discretionary spending. That top line determines what gets spent. Beneath the top line, there are arguments going back to Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson between the executive branch and the legislative branch over say-so, if you will. And that's been a much discussed issue on the campaign trail, and we'll take a look at it when we get back. But I'm sure the president would love to have a legislative blank check.
Matt Jaffe at ABC News. A number of prominent members of your party, Trent Lott, Lindsey Graham, have expressed dismay with Jim DeMint and Sarah Palin for pushing Tea Party-backed candidates. They say that Tuesday night, while it was a great victory for your party, it was a missed opportunity in the sense that you guys did not win the Senate, and that had there been other candidates, you guys could have won the Senate. Do you share those same complaints?
Look, we had a good day, and we went, from 41 to 47 at least. We'll see what happens in Washington State. They have sort of an endless process of counting. As you all know, there are no precincts in Washington State anymore. Everybody votes by mail, and it goes on and on and on endlessly. But we will have at least 47. I think that's a pretty good day. And, you can go back and second guess about whether you could have had a better candidate here or there, but the primaries decided those outcomes, and we're pretty happy with the outcome. And I would remind everyone there are 23 Democrats and only 9 Republicans up in the next cycle. We have a realistic shot at getting into the majority in the very near future.
Hi, Jessica Brady with Roll Call Newspaper. My question actually follows up on the question that was just asked, which is, in pushing a conservative agenda for next year, how do you see the moderates in your caucus, some of those who are up in 2012, fitting in with that agenda? And do you fear that it might cost them in primaries in the next election cycle?
Well, I think the most interesting thing to watch in the next Congress is how many Democrats start voting with us. We saw on the tax debate that did not occur back in September that there was bipartisan opposition to raising taxes. I think what you're more likely to see in the next Congress is a unified set of Republicans and Democrats peeling off to support our initiatives. I think every one of the 23 Democrats up in the next cycle have a clear understanding of what happened Tuesday. And I think we have major opportunities for bipartisan coalitions to support what we want to do. And we'll see how that develops. Because, there's a never-ending cycle of politics. One election ends and another one begins. And the president and 23 Senate Democrats are now in cycle. And we are optimistic that maybe the 23 Senate Democrats will take the same message out of Tuesday's election that we're pretty clear the voters gave, and that we may be able to make some progress.
With CTI TV of Taiwan, Senator, do you have any issue with the administration on foreign policy, particularly the policy towards China? Because China has been fared as a very important factor in American economic recovery. Thank you.
Most Republicans, in fact, virtually all Republicans, I think I could say in the Senate, have supported the president's approach in Iraq, which is frankly a continuation of President Bush's policy. The agreement with the Iraqi government that is being implemented by the current administration was actually signed in the previous administration. Members of the Senate Republican Conference have supported the surge in Afghanistan. Where I think we have some problems with regard to the president is over this whole issue I best could be expressed as American exceptionalism, whether America really is an exceptional country and whether it's a good idea to go abroad and, you know, kind of suggest we've been wrong on a variety of different things. That's kind of a macro observation, kind of a broad observation of differences. With regard to any particular country or China policy, I don't really have any observations about that.
In the back here.
Jean Chemnick from Platts. I wanted to ask, what specifically could you find common ground on in terms of energy independence you mentioned? And then also, you know, if Senator Lisa Murkowski is reelected in Alaska, would she continue to be the top Republican on energy and natural resources, or might there be another vote on that?
On energy, the president said he's for nuclear power. We're for nuclear power. The president has said he's for clean coal technology. We're for clean coal technology. There is, I think, bipartisan enthusiasm for things like plug-in hybrid cars, you know, reducing carbon emissions by automobile changes. Those are areas of potential cooperation. With regard to Alaska, it's pretty clear to me that we're going to have a Republican senator from Alaska. The process will unfold up there over the next weeks or months, and we'll finally determine who won. But whoever it is, whether it's the candidate who may have come in first or the candidate who appears to have come in second, they'll be conferencing with the Republicans. And then with regard to committee issues, we'll be sorting that out in the coming weeks. First, Harry and I will sit down and negotiate the ratios, the size of committees, the ratios of committees, and then we go through a process internally in the Senate where members of committees select the ranking or chairman, and then that's ratified by the full conference. All of that will be determined in the coming weeks, and we'll just have to, you know, wait and see what happens. Yeah.
Mark Sheff with Investment News. Senator, you mentioned repealing health care reform. You didn't call for a repeal of the Dodd-Frank bill. What parts of that do you want to change and how?
I'm sorry I left that out. You can't cover everything. I think that was a horrible bill too. I can't find a banker in Kentucky, none of whom had anything whatsoever to do with the financial crisis of the fall of '08, who think this bill remotely addresses that. And it was a terrible piece of legislation. Healthcare was the worst piece of legislation that's passed in my time in the Senate. Financial services bill is up there somewhere close to that. We'll be looking at it and trying to figure out how we can improve it.
One more.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'm Iftikhar Hussain, work for Voice of America, partially to the border region, Pakistan and Afghanistan. Thank you, Senator. My question is how the Republicans' control of the Congress is affecting the foreign policy in terms of the U.S. troops withdrawal from Afghanistan. And secondly, the military aid recently pledged by the United States for Pakistan military, $2 billion, because that's going to go through the Congress. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that Senate Republicans are generally supportive of the administration's policy both in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. I don't anticipate the change in the composition of the Senate or the House having an impact on the current policy of this administration in both Afghanistan and Pakistan. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Senator McConnell, for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule to be with us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, we're adjourned.